All right.
Is it about 28 minutes?
Okay. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for CB8 Zooms, a webinar about public affairs in Community Board 8. Community Board 8, as you know, is located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan from 59th Street to 96th Street, from the East River to Central Park, and also includes the lovely Roosevelt Island. I'm Lori Boris, and I'm a member of Community Board 8. And today we are joined by Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright, who represents the 76th Assembly District, which, full disclosure, is my Assembly District. It includes the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island. We're going to have questions. If you have questions and you would like to ask them of Assembly Member Seawright, put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of them as we can. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, Lori. It's great to be here. And thank you, Will, behind the scenes. Community Board 8 does such important work, and having been a former member myself, and full disclosure, my son's now loving being a Community Board 8 member. It plays such a vital role in our city government.
Well, we appreciate your support. So Assembly Member Seawright was the first woman to represent our Assembly District, and she is also chair of the People with Disabilities Committee. I do want to talk to you about your committee work. As a person living with multiple sclerosis, this is very important to me. But first, let's talk about the ERA. You have been the leading proponent of the Equal Rights Amendment in the New York State Assembly. I am in my 60s, and I cannot believe that we are still advocating for this the way we were when I was a teenager. Can you give us a class on ERA 101?
Well, thank you, Lori. I feel very passionate, as well as so many women and men do, about the Equal Rights Amendment. Our late Justice, United States Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "We will never have complete equality. Every constitution in the land has the Equal Rights Amendment. Ours does not, until women are recognized in the population, recognized in the Constitution that we represent over half the population." So what we did in the New York State Legislature, and thanks to your son, Assemblyman Alex Boris, to my west, for being a strong co-sponsor and speaking out on the bill during debate. So what we have at the state level is a expanded equality amendment. It encompasses a lot of classes besides just sex, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I first want to lay the framework for a constitutional amendment. It requires 2 passages in 2 consecutive session cycles. So we're in a 2-year session cycle. Coming up in January will be the 2nd year of the session cycle. So we got first passage last year, and then we got the second passage on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. So I dedicated my vote to my former boss and late mentor, the Honorable Sarah Weddington, who still is the youngest woman to have, or youngest person ever to have argued a case before the United States Supreme Court. And in her book that we published at the Feminist Press, she said that she predicted Roe would be overturned, and that the way to deal with it is to pass a state constitutional amendment like we have done here in New York State, protecting reproductive autonomy. And that's what we've done here. So voters will have the opportunity, now that it's received its second passage in the legislature, to vote on it during the presidential year in November of 2024. So we want to get a strong message out for everyone to support it. There will be opposition to it from the other side and from the right-wing conservatives, but it's an expanded amendment that includes a lot of different classes. It prohibits discrimination against a person based on their sex, their gender identity, their gender expression, LGBTQIA, the elderly, the disabled. And so there's a lot of broad categories. And we thought, well, we're updating the Constitution based on discrimination on sex. We might as well include these other categories. Now, a person might ask, we have the human rights law at the state level. Why do we also need an equal rights amendment? Because New York has some pretty strong laws in place. But to answer that question, it's vital that we enshrine these rights in our Constitution, because state laws can always be overturned. And if we get a right-wing conservative in as governor, the governor and the legislature, depending on who's in charge, could throw those laws right out the door, as we've been seeing with our rights being taken away at the federal level. And so that's why I'm so pleased to see that this is going to be enshrined in our state constitution.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you so much for explaining it. Is the reason, and this is my question, just as an average person who doesn't know, all of the intricacies of the state government, is the reason why we have to do it in two different cycles because it is a constitutional amendment? It is a serious thing. It's very, it has a lot of ramifications, right? Because it is a constitutional amendment. Is that why you have to do it twice? Because sometimes I feel like I'm living in the twilight zone. We did this already.
Right. So the law in New York State is that you do have to pass a constitutional amendment twice in the legislature. It has to be in two different two-year session cycles. And so in order for it to be on the ballot next November, it was critical that we get the passage the first time, which was when the governor called a special session in July in the summer. And we dealt with two issues, the Equal Rights Amendment, and we dealt with some gun legislation in response to laws that were overturned in Washington at the federal level. So to answer your question, because it's a constitutional amendment, the framers didn't want it to be easy to amend the Constitution, and they wanted all the voters of New York State to have a right and a say on when a constitutional amendment is changed or added. And so that is the reason that it requires two passages. The governor has no right to veto it or sign it because it is a constitutional amendment. Usually with legislation, the governor has the right of veto power unless a 2/3 majority were to overturn that. So with a constitutional amendment, it'll be since it's received its second passage, it will go straight before the voters and everyone will see it on the ballot in November of 2024. But we can't take it for granted. Right now, there's a $25 million campaign going on statewide. New Yorkers for Equality. A lot of our labor unions, our teachers organizations have come on board to help fund this. There's direct polling going on in different parts of the state. The messaging in Brooklyn is very different than what's on the minds of people in Buffalo. And so we have targeted messaging going on in different areas of the state to educate about this Equal Rights Amendment.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. I was confused, as I'm sure many of our viewers are confused or were confused, and now they're not. Okay, so that was great, and thank you for explaining it. Now, let's talk about your position as chair of the Committee on People with Disabilities. As I said, very close to my heart. I have multiple sclerosis, and who knows? Every day when I wake up, I never know what I'm going to face. And just as a side note, before we go anywhere, next month in November, on November 17th on a Friday, our next guest on CB8 Speaks is going to be Camille Arroyo, who is the MTA Chief Accessibility Officer. So if you're interested, mark that on your calendar. But Assembly Member Seawright, tell us what of some of the work. I understand you've had two bills passed on the committee. Tell us about those.
So thank you, Lori. I was appointed chair of the People with Disabilities last session by Speaker Hasty, and it's a committee that I requested because I feel very strongly that we need to invest more resources and more dollars into this community. Recently, Governor Hochul signed two of my bills. One of them would increase to 60% people that would disabilities being allowed to serve on the state, or it would mandate people with disabilities to serve at the State Developmental Council Board. And so if you have names, there are various positions If you have names of people that are interested, I encourage you to contact my office and we will recommend your name to the speaker and the governor for appointment to these voluntary boards. So that piece of legislation basically updates the name of the state council, the agency that must exist by federal statute to comply with federal standards. And then the beauty of it is we also tacked on that 60% of the board must be made up of people with disabilities. And the second bill basically outlaws very outdated offensive language. And so, for instance, all of our state policies and state statutes now will be updated with proper language, taking out the phrase mental retardation and other offensive language in our state statutes and laws. So we were very pleased to have overwhelming support for these two pieces of legislation. We had a fabulous Disability Awareness Day where thousands traveled to Albany, and we held press conferences and rallies at the Capitol for additional funding to be put into our state budget for OPWDD, the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. And we're gearing up for budget season as we go back into session in January. We want everyone to write your legislator and ask them to invest more funding for people with disabilities and for that state agency. So we're looking forward to having a hearing coming up this fall dealing with the issue of workforce development. Right now, it's bleeding out workers. They can get a higher paying hourly job at McDonald's and Burger King than they can as a direct service provider to people that they're serving. And that's such an important position. And so we want to increase that. And as we gear up for the budget, really invest more dollars.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that I have a couple of names that I can share with you for that purpose. Yeah. Okay. So we have one, we're going to go to some questions now. We have one question from an anonymous attendee. I'm not sure how you do that, but anyway, it says, I'm very concerned about pedestrian safety. There is egregious infractions of normal traffic on sidewalks and streets. Bicycles fly down sidewalks, go the wrong way in bike lanes, run traffic lights, swing around corners rather, and don't stop for crossing pedestrians. Cars are going way faster than 25 miles per hour. New York City has become a degraded and dangerous place for pedestrians. How many injuries are we going to put up with until this happens? Anyway, so yeah, can you address? I know that that's a very big concern, quality of life. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I totally agree. And one of the things that I hear about at my storefront community office on York Avenue and 79th Street is about bicycles and how pedestrians don't feel safe. My own daughter was hit by a bicycle, and in Manhattan, luckily she didn't suffer major injuries, but it's very scary. We've passed previous legislation requiring labeling for bicycles. We're working very closely with Community Board 8 member Michelle Birnbaum on additional legislation. One of the things that I'm proposing is maybe put in a speed bump. So bicycles are forced to slow down at that speed bump the way that a car is. And so as we gear up for legislative session, there'll be a window to introduce new bills, and we're looking to do that. And I know Assemblymember Boris also has been instrumental and focused on this as well.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question from Amy Schwartz, who's a member of the Four Freedoms Democratic Club. And she says that she thanks you for all your work on the ERA passage, and says that the Four Freedoms Club is looking forward to helping promote and educate people on the ERA amendment to the New York State Constitution in the 2024 election. Could you please share your strategies with us?
Oh, fabulous. Thank you for that wonderful question, Amy. It's very exciting to have the ERA on the ballot during a presidential year, and we specifically passed it at the state level with the intention that it would appear on the ballot during the presidential year when we have the largest turnout of voters. So what the Four Freedoms Democratic Club and Community Board 8 and others could be doing is hosting educational forums where we're educating the public that they may have to flip over the backside of their ballot to see the constitutional amendment, but it will be there, and it should be voted yes on. We don't want people to vote it down because they don't understand it. So a clear picture of why this is so necessary. And one of the single answers that I say is, depending on who our leadership is in the state, our laws can be thrown out, like our human rights law that currently prohibits discrimination. So it's critical that we enshrine this in our Constitution at the state level. And let me just point out, a lot of people get confused with the federal ERA versus the state ERA. They passed it in the United States Senate. They haven't passed it in the U.S. House of Representatives. If we had a Democratic-controlled House, and I believe we're 6 seats away, then we could have a federal equal rights amendment. That's not to be confused with the state. I think once we pass this state ERA in November of next year, it will provide a lot of momentum and motivation to finally get it done at the federal level. So working with all ages, from high school to college to our seniors, our clubs, our activists, and our leaders, to really get out the word that this amendment is a must, and that people have to be educated to know and expect that it will be on the ballot. One of the things that I do is blow up the ballot ahead of time, and I put it on my glass storefront window, and constituents come by and they get familiar with the ballot. And so if there are constitutional amendments on it, they have a chance to study up and read about it ahead of time. But like I said, there will be a targeted campaign that's going on with a broad coalition of groups like Planned Parenthood, 1199, our 32BJ, UFT, a number of coalition partners that will be helping to fund this statewide campaign to educate people. So I encourage For Freedoms to please be hooked up with that organization so that we can have a grassroots campaign all over the state of New York.
Okay, one more question from the public, which is who opposes the ERA?
People that don't believe that a woman should have control over her own body and her own reproductive health, because this constitutional amendment, in response to the overturning of Roe versus Wade, does provide protection for a woman to exercise control over her body. And so it provides for reproductive autonomy. The religious right, even though this specific bill does not touch the religious exemption, the Republicans will try to confuse voters and say, well, it's taking away our religious right. And it does not touch that section of the state constitution. And that's where education comes in, really educating the voter on what does Article 3, Section 11 of the Constitution say now, and what does it say with this amendment? And it's very basic. It's increasing the categories to prohibit discrimination. And I don't think anyone would want their daughter, their niece, their aunt, or their loved one to face discrimination or to get fired because they're pregnant or needing to take maternity leave. So basically it prohibits all forms of discrimination, and it's just a no-brainer. But there are people out there that will oppose it based on their beliefs of LGBTQ rights, transgender rights. It prohibits discrimination based on your gender identity, your gender expression. And so when you ask the question of who will oppose it, I would think the fundamental right wing who do not support a woman's control over her own body, and also people that don't support rights for LGBT people.
Okay. I'm going to let something out that I probably shouldn't say, but just for context, I guess. My grandmother, and I've told this story several times, and my son has actually raised up this issue in the legislature. My grandmother, my mother's mother, like 60% of people who have an abortion already had 3 children. And in 1943, when she couldn't get an abortion, she managed to, women will do what they have to do. And she arranged, borrowed a lot of money and had an abortion. Somebody came to the house and performed an abortion. Well, something went wrong and she bled to death basically, and she wouldn't go to the hospital. And my mother, who was still alive in this day and age, didn't understand and still doesn't understand like why her mother didn't go to the hospital. It's like, it's because of this. So, I always say to people, and I'm Catholic, so I'm, I understand all of that, craziness about, a woman doesn't have the right to make decisions. I think that when you recognize that you don't have to have an abortion if you oppose abortions, but you don't have the right to take that away from somebody who does. There are women who need abortions for all kinds of reasons, and it's not for you to decide. So that's my soapbox, and I'll stop talking about that now.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lori. I was hoping that you would share the family story. So
yeah,
thank you.
It's
well
ridiculous. Thank you. Okay, so let's get to the fun part of this, okay? I don't know if you have ever watched the Colbert Report, but he sometimes does a little quick question and answer with his guests, and so I've adapted it for a little bit for our purposes. Okay, so this is just, we want rapid fire. Like, don't think about it a lot. Just like give the first answer that comes to your mind. Okay, so okay, so what's the best sandwich?
Lox on a bagel with cream cheese.
Apples or oranges?
Definitely apples, and I love to go apple picking.
Still or sparkling?
Sparkling.
Yankees or Mets?
Ooh, that's difficult. Oh my gosh. I'm going to go. My mother, who's 90, is a huge baseball fan. She loves the Yankees. My husband's originally from Queens. He loves the Mets. I'm going to go with mom here and favor the Yankees.
Okay. And cats or dogs?
Definitely dogs. And I just so enjoyed being at the Halloween Howl the other day and seeing your precious little pancake doggy.
Okay, thank you very much. Assemblyman Seawright, we thank you very much for being with us. This has been a wonderful exchange, and I hope everyone has gained knowledge from our little thing. We want to thank Will Brightbill, who is the wizard behind the technology that gets CB8 Zooms onto YouTube and to Facebook and to our website, which is www.cb8m.com. And we will see you hopefully next month with Kamel Arroyo on disabilities. He's the MTA chair. What is he? He's the MTA Commissioner for Disabilities, I think is his correct title. Excuse me if it's wrong. Anyway, thank you, Assembly Member Seawright. Such a pleasure, and we'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you all. Thank you, Lori.
Bye.